Hey there, Husker fans. Sam McKewon along with Tom Shatel. Heavy hitters. We may be joined by Dirk Chatlin here in a few minutes as well. This is the Pick Six podcast. We are one day after signing day, so December 22nd. Happy holidays to those who celebrate. We'll have one next week, so we'll be able to say Happy New Year next week. So we'll have another podcast next week. But this one is kind of focused on what happened in the recruiting class over the last 48 to 72 hours, the usual mad dash of a new coaching staff, and Nebraska finishing fairly strong. And then Matt Rhule said a lot of interesting things yesterday that weren't really tied to his recruiting class, but just tied to the program and tied to some of his philosophical beliefs. So we'll talk to Tom Shatel about that here in a minute, because he had several thoughts in his column that he wrote yesterday. I want to remind everybody, hey, we know that a lot of folks watch this or listen to this podcast for free on YouTube or on Spotify or iTunes, whatever you want to use. That's great. We want to remind people to subscribe to the Omaha World-Herald. We're going to have a ton of stuff about Matt Rhule, about the new signees, about quarterbacks, about transfers, maybe even a little bit about where Scott Frost is going with his career. And we want you to subscribe. And you can go to www.omaha.com/subscribe. You can get that there. 26 weeks for $1. Now, if you do that right now, today is December 22nd. This will go from December 22nd all the way through June, which gives you pretty much everything, folks. It's going to give you all of the recruiting from into February, the entire basketball season, the entire baseball season, all of the camp season that Matt Rhule's already hyping up about trying to get recruits in the summer. So you're going to get a ton right now. If you need a last-second holiday gift for Christmas or whatever you celebrate, this is the thing. An Omaha.com subscription, 1 week, $26. Subscribe. Okay, Tom, thank you for joining me today, joining us. Interesting press conference yesterday, 30 minutes. Felt like it went about 10 minutes. He's a good talker. He says a lot of stuff. You had a good column. I was curious, when you're listening to what he's saying, what popped out to you the most right away about his press conference, maybe recruiting or non-recruiting?
Well, we've certainly I've been through a lot of these, and we tend to grade these sometimes on style. And struck me that Rhule is a good talker, but he did at the introduction press conference, he came off like he was selling himself, and he was trying to, selling the program to recruits and anybody who would listen, boosters, media, whatever. And he came up like a preacher, so on and so forth. It was fascinating to watch. Yesterday he said a lot, but he didn't really. It was just he didn't come off like a guy who talks a lot. He came off like a guy who was just talking football, and
right.
It was kind of casual, and it wasn't really over the top or anything. It was. I really appreciated if you ask a guy a question, he's going to give you a good, thoughtful answer. Two of the things that just stood out to me were not even about recruits or the individual players. It was one when he said, I did it this way at Temple. I did it another way at Baylor, and I've got to figure out the way to do it here. I thought that was incredibly insightful or smart. I just thought it sounded like a guy who's been a head coach before. We haven't had that around here. It's like so many guys have tried to figure out, how to be a college head coach, and even Mike Riley had been a head coach, but he didn't necessarily. He was going to do it the Oregon State way here, and I like the fact that he's going to try to reinvent himself a little bit, so that it's going to fit here with him. He's going to do the things that that I guess that are the core of what he believes, the physical play and toughness and all that, and that fits. But I just like the way he's okay. I'm going to try to figure out, and it kind of lends toward the Big Ten as a different animal. and he hasn't been in the Big Ten in a long time, so he's going to figure that out. But I also like this what he said about the offensive line. I thought when he said, "Hey, I'm buying this," and even if he's just saying that to try and keep the offensive linemen engaged and get them working hard in the offseason. It sounded like a coach. I mean, so many coaches say, "I got to have my players." Here's a guy who said, "I'm going to coach what I got, and we're going to be good." And I thought that was refreshing.
I did too. I think one of the things he said about the offensive line is if you don't have an identity as a scheme or a system, it makes it very hard on the offensive lineman. He noted that Marcus Satterfield, who is currently his offensive coordinator and now his quarterbacks coach, was sort of assigned the assistant offensive line role in 1 year with the Carolina Panthers because Rhule wanted Satterfield to see what it's like on offensive linemen when they have to execute play calls that don't necessarily make it easy on offensive linemen. And I think in a subtle way, part of what he was saying is that when you look at Nebraska's offense, or you just look at offenses in general, there's ways to protect offensive linemen and there's ways to make their job really hard. And I'll be honest with you, I think Nebraska's offense last year was a little bit hard on offensive linemen in a couple of different ways. One of which was that goofy, using the unbalanced line where they're taking a tackle, they're putting two tackles next to each other so they can have a tight end unexposed on the other side. That scheme did not seem to help Nebraska at all. It wasn't very effective. Other teams got sacks off of that scheme. And then just generally, it felt like Nebraska never had a clear identity in the run game. They'd try to run the ball, and if it didn't work, then they'd stop running the ball. And so I thought that was notable that he was willing to say that. I think he really wants to build a team around the offensive and defensive lines, and he wants to build the culture under the identity of those guys, which means that you can't rag on them all the time. And Donovan Raiola didn't rag on him. Donovan Raiola didn't talk at all. But Mickey Joseph made it pretty clear they were going to recruit over a lot of the players who were already on the roster. And I don't think that would have worked. I don't think you can just throw offensive linemen out like babies with the bathwater. You can't do that. It takes too long to develop them. It takes too much to get to get them to play well. And you can see how coveted they are. Bryce Benhart had gone in the transfer portal. Looks like he's going to stick around. But if he had gone, believe me, he wasn't going to, NAIA school. He was probably going to a Power 5 school that would have been, that would have wanted him because it's hard to develop multi-year starters at the Power 5 level. So they're going to roll with the guys that they have. The other thing that struck me, and I wanted your thoughts on this, you kind of got a sense of where they are with the quarterbacks. The amount of time that he talked about Jeff Sims, and what he said about it, right? That he's like, we didn't just go into the transfer portal to get a quarterback. We went to get because I like Jeff Sims, and what he was able to say about him. And some of it, I think, was a little bit of hype. I don't know that I would describe Jeff Sims as one of the better passers in the country or potential passers, but the amount of praise that he gave him compared to what he said about Casey Thompson. And that may have been to some degree in response to some of the things that Casey's dad, Charles, has said. And I don't know that Rhule appreciates that. I can't imagine he appreciates that very much. It was striking, wasn't it? Like what Rhule said and how he put it.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit to remember what he said exactly about Thompson, but
we didn't say much. He just kind of said he's a good guy. Yeah, that's the point. Yeah,
I mean, that's one thing I've wondered, Sam, is it's been pretty quiet around Thompson. I understand that there's a story that came out this week that he's going to. His dad said he's going to come back and try to play, and he expects to start. But I wondering if they've got a lot of quarterbacks there, and I wonder sometimes year one, do you want the guy who was here before? I mean, in a lot of ways, Thompson, an older guy, can probably help, but maybe in year one you want to get going with somebody else, and I just wonder if Rhule wants him. I mean, maybe he's not going out of his way to to say come back. I mean, yeah, you can be here, but I think that'll be interesting, especially if they're going to go to the quarterback who can run. That's not necessarily Casey. He's kind of a pocket guy. I mean, he can run a little bit. That's not his forte necessarily. I don't know. I think that's interesting.
Well, here's what he said. This is what he said about Casey Thompson. Yeah, I talked to Casey. He's an impressive young man. Obviously, I don't share what I say to guys in the conversations that we have. He's played a lot of football. I'm looking forward to him getting healthy and moving forward. That's
moving
what he said.
Forward. Where? Yeah.
Well,
exactly. I don't know.
The thing that he said about what he likes in 4-year quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And I asked him that because I'll explain why I asked it the way I did here in a second. But in terms of freshman quarterbacks, I always look for guys that have it. I know that sounds crazy. If you feel them when they play, if they are accurate, if they are tough in college football, if they can pick up first downs on their feet running, if the team follows them, if they are winners, we should bring them on. So to me, the more winners, the better. There was a time you recruited a ton of quarterbacks that would sometimes go play other positions and be NFL players. Now guys transfer before that happens. I'm just trying to find winners. The reason I asked him the question the way that I did is because I think you can actually begin to make a logical argument that the only time you'll recruit a high school quarterback is if you have a no doubt, he's great, no question about it kind of guy that you can land. But there's no point in landing a tweener because if that guy is kind of on the line, he's probably not going to play for you because you're always going to be tempted by the transfer portal. And so, from my perspective, 4 of the last 8 Heisman winners were transfers. Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, and now Caleb Williams. Lincoln Riley coached 3 of them, which maybe tells you a little bit about the flaws in the Heisman voting system, but, we'll save that for a different day. The reality is transfer quarterbacks win a lot of football games now. And you can make the argument of we're just going to recruit transfers. We're going to go get a guy that's already done it somewhere else that we can trust to come in here and do it. And we're not going to mess around with freshmen except for, walk-ons and backups who may not play, but we know they'll stick here and we know they'll run our offense the way we want to if the third stringer has to play. What was striking about what with Casey is that there's this kind of going into the week. I mean, I've just never gotten the sense that Casey Thompson was top of mind because there's a rehab to do, and then he's going to have to fit what they want to do. I don't think it's going to be one of these. Right. Okay, we just won't run the ball with the quarterback so that you can stay in the pocket. I don't think it's going to be that easy. Right. So there's going to have to be a meeting of the minds there, and I was struck by that answer. And I was also struck by the whole thing with the transfer portal, where he's like, well, some guys they probably do need to move on. It was.
I agree.
He's like, I think I only talked to 2 or 3 guys that went into the portal, but some guys that called me and said they wanted to come back. I'd said that I think it's best if you do move on. It's like, okay. I appreciate that, right?
Well, Sam, the thing I wonder about with Satterfield, we haven't talked to yet. To me, Rhule is going to be involved in a lot of this stuff. I mean, I think he's going to be very hands-on with that. But a lot of, it seems to me we've in Nebraska, the offense has built from the outside in. It's like you start with the quarterback and the receivers and the running back, and then you kind of build the offensive line around what you want to do with those guys. I wonder are they going to find out what their offensive linemen can do in the spring, and then build the offense around that? I'd be curious to see if the quarterback run game, if that's tied into that at all, or I mean, if you can't pass protect, there's no reason to have a guy back there in the pocket. But I'm maybe I'm reading too much into the offensive line stuff. But I'm really curious to see because it seems like they, it just like last fall, I asked Whipple, what do you think about your offensive line? Can you run your stuff with these guys? And oh yeah, he goes, this line's better than the one I had to pick. I was like, Well, okay. I guess we'll
Maybe
find
that's true.
out.
The defenses in the Big Ten are way better than the defenses in
I
the
just,
ACC.
yeah. So I think I really think in this league you have to figure out what your offensive line can do, and then I think you should tailor make your offense around that. And if you've got a stud line and it's developed, it's old, and they can do whatever they want, that they can move people anywhere you want them, then you can, uh, you know, whatever. But I just think that. Yeah, I just got the vibe that Thompson can come back, but he's not necessarily going to start. And but the fact that he was still in the portal and hadn't left, I don't know. I just wondered. Okay, maybe he and Rhule are on the same page here, and he's going to come back. So
Yeah, he's not. Yeah, he's not in the portal. He isn't in the portal.
right.
He just hasn't entered it. Like he's
He's
well. I
still
mean,
here.
I don't know. I don't know that he's got a ton of options. The one that obviously jumped out at me was Florida Atlantic because Tom Herman's the head coach there. Like I don't know what Florida FAU has.
Well, I mean, would a guy like him go to OU for a year? I mean, they got Gabriel. I think he's back, but I haven't seen him leaving any. But
Yeah, I don't
I don't
know.
know. I'm just he might have an option somewhere. But he's still here. He's still
No,
here,
that's, yeah, that's a great question. I think OU has a plethora of issues. Like I understand the OU team that we saw here in Lincoln. That's the best that team played all season long, with maybe the exception of the first half against Oklahoma State. But that's not a very good team. Like that was a team that really struggled.
What a strange game that was. That was the worst game that the Mickey Joseph Huskers played. And
oh, no question.
If they'd played like they did against Iowa or Wisconsin or maybe one of the other teams, that game would have been a lot different. Who knows? But maybe not. What did you make of Rhule's comment about no celebrity coaches? Was that a shot at Mickey?
No, I don't think so. I think that was a shot at coaches who go out and hire $2 million coordinators who may or may not fit what you're trying to do. So
Right.
like you go out and hire a huge name and it's just a name. Like it's maybe a guy that doesn't. I think it's pretty clear to me that Matt Rhule's belief system is if you're going to work for Matt, you have to work really hard. B, you have to grind. You have to really stay dedicated to the template and the blueprint and the process that they have. And it's not going to be about you.
Right.
To some degree, it is going to be a little bit about Rhule because he's the boss. But I also think Rhule has a humility too. Like I don't think he wants it to be about him either per se. I think he wants it to be about the players. And so, the best example I can come up with is probably Bob Diaco. Like I thought now Diaco, I mean, that's the one I come up with because I thought Bob was really, when he got here, was really strange. Like and I got to know him somewhat, and I didn't mind him as a person, but he was just so different from everyone else, and he tried to be different. And he felt like he was one guy, and then the rest of the staff was somebody else.
Right.
And that's probably the best example that I can come up with. I'm trying to maybe rack my brain for another one, and I just don't.
Well, maybe Bo back in 2003 was a little bit like that.
Well, he was. I mean, yeah, he was a linebackers coach for the Packers, and he became a celebrity because of who he was. But remember when everybody was saying that Bo needed to just go hire Mike Stoops, and he didn't. He just kept John Papuchis as his DC. But people were mad about that. They're like, go get Mike. And I think that's what I mean is like just go get a really big name or go hire. There was another one out there. Remember last year when Scott Frost was supposed to go out and hire Tom Herman?
Yeah.
Well, I'll go hire Tom Herman. And I'm not sure he hired the right guy anyway, but Mark Whipple wasn't Tom Herman. I
Yeah.
think it's one of those deals where you're like trying to avoid just hiring a name to hire a name.
Well, you know what?
There are a lot of names. He hired guys that I think fit his culture.
Yeah, and instead of celebrity coaches, he might like project coaches, like Rayola is a guy with he may have a very promising future as an offensive line coach. He's in a lot of ways he's still starting out. So maybe he sees something that maybe he's talked to people. I don't know. I think Rhule wants to coach people up. So rather than bring in somebody who's not coachable, like a celebrity coach.
Yeah,
But
I think Raiola, if if Rhule kind of incorporates Raiola into the job, and what they do is they talk about what the line can do, I do think you'll see a better performance from the line. I do think there were times last year where the line was limited due to injuries or for whatever else, and Nebraska still ran what it thought it needed to run to move the ball. And I don't know that that always reflected well on the line because they were asking them to do some things they weren't great at. And so, like I think sometimes in life and I do this sometimes as I don't know, a manager or whatever. You try to say, well, I want this, and I want this from this person, and maybe that's not something they're great at. Like,
yeah.
and I think last year a lot of times the offensive line was asked to do things they're not necessarily that good at, like taking an offensive tackle and putting him at guard. Like that's stuff like that. Just and obviously Raiola coaches the scheme that Matt Rhule wants. He was very honest about that too. Did you notice that? Like he's like, there's three different kinds of schemes, and Donovan fits the scheme that I want. And most of all, what I want is someone who coaches the way I want them to. Like that's pretty logical, actually. It's pretty logical.
Yeah, it is. And but speaking of scheme, I get the feeling we're maybe trending. We're taking a break at least from that for a while. Ever since Bill Callahan showed up and talked about the West Coast offense, I feel like Nebraska's been about scheme. I mean, with Osborne and Solich, of course, with Frank, we were never quite sure what offense they were running, but that was the scheme was never really the thing. Osborne was more of an offensive system. I mean, his scheme was very complicated. It was simple, yet inside it was very. He did a lot of things with it. But I just feel like yesterday we talked about the new defensive coordinator, White. Well, we're going to do whatever we need to do to win, kind of thing. That's what he's saying. That what we did at Baylor, it may not work here. So we're going to figure out what works here, instead of like, I've got my scheme, and by God, everybody's going to have to adjust to it. It's what he's doing is my definition of what coaching is. So, I mean, we'll see what, we haven't had a practice yet. We don't know what he's going to do or how he's going to do, but it sounds more like coaching. He sounds more like a ball coach than all the other guys put together.
Anything jump out at you about the recruiting class? I mean, I know that's not necessarily your number one.
The in-state guys who kind of bought in, and all the work he did with that, and what kind of role does social media play in that? Me, I'm not Mr. I can't even figure out how to do the emojis, but I just wonder when there's photos of him playing the ping pong with Maverick Nuna's mom, and they're out there. He looks like. I mean, the other kids see that kind of stuff? Do they? I don't know. I really thought he put a lot of work into the in-state thing, and to get those guys was a really good statement. I remember when they hired Frost. Nick Hendricks signed up early, but some other guys didn't sign up early, and it was interesting to see. I thought, sure they lost. Some guys went outstate, but I'm anxious to see a year from now and the year after that if the emphasis stays there, one, and two, do the kids maybe have a different opinion? Like, would they have gone after Zane Flores if they'd been here, last year, and would he have stayed? Guys like that. The tight end that they lost, the Pierce kid. I mean, sometimes it's too late. The kids are going to honor the commitment, but I'm anxious to see that a little bit.
Me too. There's 7 guys that I think have Nebraska offers in state for 2024. I think they can get all 7. I really do. And I'm not saying they're going to. I think they have shot. Whereas I think Nebraska's previous staff, there'd be 1 or 2 guys every year. You just didn't feel like Nebraska was going to grab them. Just a side note about the quarterback thing. Now, I think it's actually going to end up working out, Tom, because I think Dylan Raiola is a real option for Nebraska at this moment, and it wouldn't have benefited Nebraska to have signed a top shelf 2023 quarterback when they, then Dylan Raiola is available in 2024. But let me just say this. There are 4 quarterbacks in the Midwest who are 4-star players, essentially. Zane Flores, Lincoln Keenholz out of Pierce, South Dakota, Avery Johnson at Kansas State and Mays, Kansas, and J.J. Cole, the son of the Coles kicking guy, out of Ankeny, Iowa. They signed with Iowa State, Cole. Johnson signed with K-State. Keenholz signed with Ohio State. It's one of the reasons Raiola decommitted. And Flores signed with Oklahoma State. Nebraska offered 2 of them. They only really recruited with any genuine effort. I'm talking about the old staff, 1 of them. And that was Cole. And that ended kind of when Mario Verduzco was fired. 4 guys within, 150, 200 miles. I don't know where Pierre is. 300 miles. 300 miles of Lincoln. 4-star guys that all went to better programs currently than Nebraska. And Nebraska didn't get 1 of them. Instead, they go with a guy that Mark Whipple brought from Springfield, Massachusetts, and William Pop Watson. Whipple gets fired. Watson decommits. He goes to Virginia Tech. Now, again, if they get Dylan Raiola, none of that matters. It just doesn't. It just doesn't matter. But man, did they screw that up?
They shouldn't have let Whipple bring his guy, because Whipple wasn't going to be here no matter what. So why would you let him bring a guy?
I don't know, because
it didn't make any sense to me.
Disconnected from it, like he wasn't plugged in anymore. Like it just like that last year was almost like he was the accidental tourist in his own program. I'm not trying to knock Scott too much. I have more empathy, I think, than a lot of people do for what he experienced here. I think it was harder than we appreciate. But did I not understand that at all? Like, why? And Watson's a good player. Don't get me wrong. He's a good quarterback. But my goodness, you had to know that if Whipple wasn't around, he wasn't going to come here. And so they miss out on everybody.
Yeah, it's the more I think about the era, I just think it was a bad fit. And that was the stunner of the whole thing, that he didn't fit, and probably was a better fit at UCF and wherever else he ends up landing, or maybe a better fit as a coordinator. Speaking of fit, this week I was shocked in a good way to see Ryan Held get the job at UNC Kearney. I think that's a wonderful fit. That's a great fit. And I when Josh Lynn left, I wasn't really thinking about candidates, but that was like the farthest thing from my mind. And then when I saw the news, I said, "Wow, that's a good hire, because he's a good fit there." And I just think fit is everything. And I think Rhule fits here. I mean, we'll see.
Do you think he's a better fit than how do you think Rhule fits compared to Callahan, Bo, Riley, and Frost?
I think Bo had a chance because he was in Big Ten and the Midwest roots, but he probably had the best chance of any of them. And really, he started out in the Big 12. but just the toughness. I really think there is that thing that it's an inherent part of Nebraska football that you must be tough, you must be physical, you must play defense, and and you must develop. I think those things are all inherent in the call it heritage or the tradition, the bloodlines. But I think doesn't mean you can't pass and you can't do this and that. But I think you must do those things first. And but I think he probably had the best chance. But I think Rhule again finally got a guy who's done it before, and it's not a job. It's just not a place where you learn on the job. It's you don't develop head coaches here. You need to go get one who's done it. Yeah, Tom Osborne hadn't done it, but he'd been around, and they got lucky a little bit with him. Him to work out like he did, but so Luke Fickell's a good fit where he is, and it's going to be interesting when Iowa has to do their hiring. They'll probably they need to go find a fit, or it's just if you don't get the fit, it doesn't work. Eventually, it's going to be flawed. So I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. But we were talking, I guess, about Frost and Whipple. I got on a tangent there.
So speaking of Iowa, I mean, I guess in theory, when something bad happens to Iowa, it's good news for Nebraska. They had a 5-star offensive tackle, Caden Proctor, decommit from Iowa and switch to Alabama on signing day. And what was striking about that decision, and it I think it's going to be the launch point for maybe some conversations about when signing day should be, is Caden Proctor was not a new on Alabama's radar. He had been recruited by Alabama for years, and he'd been recruited by Iowa for years. And he committed to Iowa in the summer, and he spent basically every game on Iowa's sideline. He was sort of the leader of the class. He had been to, hundreds of Iowa games, something like that, some absurd number. His teammate had 5-star teammate had committed to Iowa and was a freshman there and all that stuff. Then about 2 weeks before the end of the season, I was playing Wisconsin, and they beat him pretty bad, as you might recall. And he wasn't there. And nobody really knew why, but he was actually taking a visit to Oregon. And then the weekend before signing day, he takes in a visit to Alabama, which, again, still the same Alabama from 6 months before. Nothing's changed about Alabama, always the same. Right. Decides to flip to Alabama on signing day. Now, this leaves Iowa in a lurch, and of course, Nebraska fans don't care about this. And this hasn't happened very much to Nebraska. Not really. It hasn't. This situation, Josh Freeman's maybe the closest scenario, but I don't think anybody was weeping over Josh.
Wow, that's an old name. Wow.
Yeah. Josh Freeman flipped to Kansas State, and he left a phone message on
Bellevue, Missouri. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a flaky thing to do, but I don't know that it's quite like this, because Josh wasn't at every single game and the leader of the class and all that stuff. So he decommits, and Iowa has no time to replace him, and they couldn't have replaced him. Like they can't go out and try to replace and recruit over him, because then they're worried they're going to push him out of the class. And so this prompts this question. This is an example of a situation where I think you can make a pretty plausible argument that you need to have a summer signing date. And if a kid really wants to be with a program, that is, a Caden Proctor really wants to go to Iowa, he signs then. And there's no in-season shenanigans or any of that stuff. You have a summer signing date, then you have a February signing date, because that if that kid is not all in and he doesn't sign in the summer, then you already know you got to wait all the way to February, and you're going to cover you're going to see CYA. You're going to make sure that you have a guy that you can add. Our colleague Z, the director of visuals at the World-Herald, made a great point off camera, and this is really good. When we get into the college football playoff in 2 years, there's no way they're going to have a December signing date, because you're not going to ask these teams in the playoff to try to hold on to a class while they're playing for a national title in December. No way. So isn't the December thing going? I mean, isn't it gone soon enough?
Yeah, and it just hasn't worked out. And I don't know anybody that really likes it. To me, it's just crazy to have it this week, before Christmas, especially. It's just, but you're right in the middle of bowl season. You're right in the middle of the transfer season. I mean, there needs to be a little order here. Transfers and recruiting at the same time. It is crazy, and I don't know enough about the Iowa situation to know why, if any of that played into it or not. Why all of a sudden he's going to visit Oregon and Alabama. The first thing I thought of was NIL, and maybe those schools found maybe they found some money for him that Iowa didn't have. But it couldn't have been Brian Ferentz, because they, the offensive linemen are treated like royalty there. I mean, those guys are going to do what they do no matter what. So, in fact, the offense actually plays to the offensive linemen. So, I think they, I don't know why that happened, but yeah, it's absolutely crazy to have that happen now. I think a good, I can't relate. I've got daughters. I don't have football players, but if you want to sign in August, why not? Now, a lot of guys are going to wait though, because they want to. Now, maybe some would sign early, because I'll have a guarantee no matter what kind of senior year I have. If I get hurt, or maybe I won't have a good senior year, and all of a sudden the offer will go away. Maybe I want to sign now so I can get that guarantee. But other guys are going to gamble on themselves and say, I'm going to have a good senior year. I'm going to wait. And when we go back to where, this is transfer season. And then once coaches figure out the transfers they want, they fill in the rest with recruits in January and February. So, roster management. The way this is right now, it doesn't really fit roster management very well, because you've got too many things going on at once. So I don't think it'll be the 12 playoff teams. I mean, obviously, there are probably going to be 12 different teams every year, or at least I theoretically maybe they'll be the same 12 every year, but it won't just be them who are going to want to get this changed. I don't know many coaches at all who want this, so. I think I would think next year this could go away.
Interesting. Yeah, I like the way that you're looking at it. I think the summer signing date would be designed for prospects who are in, and they're all the way in, and they don't want to waste any time. I think that would be an example of, and you could always opt out. You could have a condition in there. You can opt out if there's a head coaching change, but this would be an example of your in-state offensive lineman who has no intention of going anywhere else, wants to sign, wants to be in, and then it could be, a couple of out-of-state kids who just really know this is where they want to be, and maybe they're a quarterback or they're whatever. So you'd probably be 6 to 8 guys. And then the rest of the guys, what would happen is you'd probably see a situation where kids wouldn't commit. They would just be like, you know what? I'm not really ready to commit. Because I'm not ready to sign. And what I think has started to happen is now that kids can take summer official visits, they take the visits and then they make a commitment that's non-binding sometime in June or July, because they want to concentrate on their senior football season. They don't want to worry about recruiting. They want to concentrate on that. And then they get to the end of their senior football season, and all of a sudden now it's time to actually firm up what they had wanted to do. And sometimes those guys don't want to do that. What a summer and February signing date would do is it would give teams an opportunity to know exactly where they stand with these players. And it would give them an opportunity to watch senior film of players who might have had good senior seasons and reimagine some of the offers. Because I think what's happening right now is there's just no time to work through all of that issue in December. And one of the reasons they wanted a December signing date is because coaches were tired of carrying all of these recruits all the way to February. They got tired of babysitting them in January, and they just wanted it over with. But the transfer portal changes all that, because the transfer portal is for December. And beyond that, if you can sign 7 to 10 guys in a class and not have to babysit those 10 because they signed in the summer, that to me seems like the best of both worlds. We'll see what happens.
I agree. Totally. Let's get it done.
Let's get it done. All right. Not much else, I think, left on the docket. I know you've got your annual wish list column coming up on Sunday. I know you'll have Matt Rhule in there. What do you think of where they are? Just in the, here we are. We're a month in. It's December 22nd. He was hired on 28th or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
By the time we talk again, it'll be a month. Well, how do you think they've done so far? And what jumps out at you positively? Maybe what might be a question mark?
Well, I didn't know what kind of signing day they'd have, and I think they had a pretty good one. For all things considered. He was hired early, right after the last game, but that doesn't always mean you're going to get who you want. I think they got a lot of guys they wanted, and I think he got the message out. He's been out there. He's most of his staff hired. I don't know about the inner workings, a football staff today is not just your 9 or 10 coaches and a recruiting coordinator. It's an army, and I don't know. I'm sure that they'll be filling in a lot of those office jobs as they go, and but I think it's been a good start. I don't think I don't want to say great, or I wouldn't say bad. I think it's been good in a lot of ways, because he has gotten the message out. He's been out there, and I think you're starting inside out. You got to get in state and get the word out, and get around to those high schools. And they've got a lot more work to do after. They've got to get around to all the schools that they can. But he's been busy. I mean, he's been a lot of places. So I'd say good. I think, but we'll learn more. I think the important stuff is coming up: the strength and conditioning winter, and then the spring drills. Again, I expect those to be kind of a bloodbath. Get in there and pound, and find out who wants to hit, and so we'll see. And that'll be about identifying who can do what, and then they hopefully build a scheme around those
today.
guys. So
The last.
Sorry, I had my World-Herald story up, and it turned into a Matt Rhule auto run. So yeah, I got a little
fun.
Matt Rhule auto video in there.
Well, we could just play him and let him tell us.
It was pretty impressive. I tell you, I was impressed by what he did yesterday, and you could tell everybody was a little worn out. It's been a long month of just a lot of change and a lot of things going on. We didn't talk a ton about the transfer portal, but I think Nebraska's done okay there. Clearly needed to get some more players on defense. They had Corey Collier, Elijah Judy, and Chief Borders, and a lot of changes on defense. So the defense has to get better. I wrote about that. It has to be elite. They have to be fast. I don't know that you're ever going to build a top 10 offense at Nebraska, but I think you can build a top 10 defense here.
I just think, I try not to grade press conferences, but I've been impressed that he appears to be kind of a no-nonsense, kind of a straight shooter. We'll find out as we go just how straight. But he's a ball coach who wants to talk football, and boy, that's going to resonate in this state. It's going to go a long way. And I'm trying to imagine the press conferences this fall. Talk about other teams' personnel. Get into what what Nebraska's doing. Might get some more thoughtful answers than we've had. Might get some more some more football talk. Yeah, and so I'm anxious to see how that goes. But again, so far so good, and So one thing we can certainly wait to ask, but find out. But if there's no celebrity assistants, will we get to talk to the assistants? Will we get the coordinators? Well, who will come out from behind the curtain every week? And or is it a program where the head coach is the only voice? Those things matter to people who do journalism for a living, and I think they matter to the fans too. But anyway, I'm anxious to see how it all develops. But I think, like I said, so far so good.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more, Tom. I'm not saying that we're going to get every assistant, but I did think last season, once Scott was fired, things got awfully, what's the right word? Just really boring. Like, there were a lot of people who didn't talk, and there were, a lot of players who didn't talk that you kind of wish were. And I don't know. I felt like we got a lot. We got a lot of a dose of Mickey and Whipple, and Bill Bush was pretty good, but I felt like there was just not as much from the players. And so hopefully we hear more from them. Hopefully we hear more from them, and then we hear a little bit more from the assistants too. Nebraska's long had a tradition of talking to all of the assistants up until when Scott got there. You could talk to all of the assistants after the game. That then changed to just Scott after the game. But we'll see what happens. I'd love to be able to talk to the coordinators after the game on top of that.
And I would love to see some of those spring practices open to us. And,
right. One or two. It doesn't have to be 15.
Just let us see what's going on and how it works.
Yep. That would be fun to be able to see that and just to watch maybe one or two so we get a flavor for how Rhule runs a practice. After all, he's pretty used to open practices now. They have those in the NFL. Okay, for Tom, I'm Sam McKewon. That is this week's Pick Six podcast. We will be back next week, probably again on Thursday, to wish you Happy New Year and to break down the college football playoff. I don't know if you remember, but there's two Big Ten teams that unbelievable. And there's a bunch of Big Ten teams playing on New Year's Day and right before and right after it. So we're gonna break down the Big Ten bowls next week and how Nebraska gets back to the postseason. For Tom, I'm Sam. Thanks for listening, fam.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.